oh sorry, I'm right. I did a lot of research over public opinion polling because a lot of the different methods that we use in polls, like some of the things that we see on social media, are basically just affecting the way that the public is reaching out to the president and how certain things are being, how certain responses are being generated. Basically, every president since JFK has heavily integrated public opinion polling into their campaigns, and then eventually into administration decisions. So we see it a lot more in campaigns, obviously, than we do during the actual term in office, because it's to get a basic idea of how the public is going to, lean towards a candidate. President Reagan was the first president to have an official pollster in charge of gauging the public's opinion, an actual, position in place. I read a piece written for the American Association for Public Opinion Research, and it's noted that different issues, I mean, this is kind of common sense, but different issues will yield different levels of responsiveness. For example, some of the, like healthcare, for example, will probably get a little bit more public policy response, generate a little bit more conversation in terms of the policy level, as opposed to maybe some of the other social issues that, obviously there's a lot of talk about marriage, things like that, but when we're talking about a policy issue, there's going to be a different level of responsiveness. Some of the factors that are mentioned include the level of pressure on the issue. So, for example, a fiscal cliff, deadline, that's going to have a little bit more pressure than something that doesn't need to be discussed right away. Percentage difference between some of the different results. So if it's a really, really close, narrow margin in terms of the results, it might be looked at a little bit more closely. And then the level of support surrounding the issue. So if it has higher support, it might be looked at a little bit closer than the other issues. Let's see. So polling, people who are kind of monitoring polls have changed their methods a little bit since the significant difference was noticed after the incorrect prediction of the defeat of Harry Truman in 1948. Basically, once there were, they incorrectly predicted, the news media, everybody found out about it, and then it turned out the poll was wrong. So polling groups began focusing a lot more closely on the samples that, the sample of people that they choose to poll, including location and age groups, and they're also more careful when releasing the official outcomes of the polls, because it doesn't only affect the public's opinion, but it also affects things at a higher level. Lawrence Jacobs and Robert Shapiro, who were quoted in several essays that I wrote, concluded that a majority of the population they interviewed believe that polling exists for presidents to increase popularity as well as their chances of being reelected, and then basically for presidents to essentially benefit themselves. So a lot of people they interviewed believed their voices weren't necessarily being heard as well as they thought they were. It was more of the president listening to them saying, this is how popular I am, or this is how unpopular I am. For my benefit, how can I change what I'm doing? According to the two professors, it's not uncommon for presidents to monitor polling data to manipulate future polls to attract attention and support of voters. Basically, they do this by using attractive vocabulary that might draw a more positive reaction in terms of the issues, switching up the way the questions being asked a little bit. A lot of presidents are trying to stay in history have tried to stay away from this. They don't want to manipulate polls. President Clinton actually fired one of his pollsters after they manipulated a poll in order to create a different message than the original poll was trying to draw support for. Polls obviously aren't just used to gauge an opinion of how not just trying to figure out how popular or how well the public thinks the president's doing his job. Obviously, there's a lot of different questions that can be asked. NPR aired a story in 2009 about the Affordable Care Act. The poll reflects, it basically reflected the amount that Congress was listening to the responders and not just the president, but they really felt like their voices weren't being heard, and it can go either way. Obviously, actual impact that the president had on public policy. They really just didn't feel like their voices were being heard, and I thought that was really important because I think a lot of people feel that way. Carnegie Mellon did a research project about Twitter polls and how a lot of the polling methods that we've been using in the past are kind of turning over to different social media sites. They looked at Twitter to track public opinions in a more personalized way instead of just asking yes or no questions. They found that it might actually be to the benefit of polling groups to use social media sites instead of just asking yes or no questions, because that generates more conversation and it helps the researchers and eventually administrations figure out exactly what they think about some of the issues being presented, as opposed to do they like this or do they not like this, just straightforward black and white answers. Some of the issues that they talked about with Twitter, obviously there's going to be a lot of them. One of the things they mentioned was confirmation bias, which was kind of, I mean, it's kind of similar to the Truman example. If you, I mean, it's important to do research once you hear a piece of news is out. On Twitter, for example, if you read something you're not sure is true, but you believe the source, you're more likely to just retweet it as opposed to actually doing research about it. And that way, the researchers really don't, or the analysts really don't understand how you actually feel about the issue, just because you're simply copying and pasting what you've heard before. So that's obviously one of the issues. The other one they mentioned was, it's called namespace collision, which is using just the same keywords or names that have nothing to do with the issue, but they're exactly the same as the issue that you're trying to research, if that makes sense. It's kind of complicated to describe. I think, so basically my last question, or my overall question was whether public opinion polls are still necessary. I think the bottom line is they are, but we just have to be careful how we're using them, because if we're, conducting too many polls on Twitter and we're not sure what the actual results are, some of the different phrases, maybe sarcasm was one of the things they mentioned. There's really no way to track sarcasm unless you're reading carefully into it. So the content is important. So the content's important, the methods are important. So public opinion polls are still important. It's just a matter of how we're using them.
All right. Questions for Carolyn?
Silver, with his predictions in 2008 and 2012, were incredibly accurate because of this sabermetrics method that depended on the weight distribution between polls. Do you think that Facebook and Twitter will eventually get to a point where they will have polls that have a higher weight than some of these public opinion polls, or do you think that Twitter and Facebook will fall out and something else will come up to replace them?
I think it really depends on the population, because if there's if there's enough people using Facebook and Twitter to maybe answer the polls that are a little bit more involved in politics and people are interested in the issue, I think it's just a matter of how many people are using it and whether or not they're, for example, answering the question to get out of the way, or there's really no way to gauge that. But I think as the population of social media continues to grow, it might have a little bit more weight.
You said public opinion polls. Does that include things like exit polls and polls done?
Yeah, I did have a little bit about exit poll. I mean, it was just a little bit of history on exit polls. I think I did. I might have taken them all, honestly. And yeah, I mean, obviously those are still useful, to kind of figure out. There's not a whole lot of. I don't think exit polls carry as. I mean, I think they probably carry a little bit more weight because they're actually reaching the voters who are going out to vote, as opposed to calling people who may have registered to vote who might not actually go out to vote. It can go either way. Again, it depends on the population.
So after reading through everything, do you think polls at a higher rate are more accurate than they are wrong?
I think they're starting to become more, I mean, there's pollsters that are using like mix-overs, using different methods to, the accuracy is increasing. But again, it depends on how, because the, traditional polling methods seem to be accurate because of the different calculations that they've used. And the methods about, in terms of population and demographics, things like that, locations, whether it's a phone call or on the internet or exit polling. Some of them are starting to be, I think some of them are still important because they're more accurate, but that's why I mentioned that it's important to recall or realize how we're doing it, because social media is not going to be as accurate as other areas.
How much do you think polls affect public opinion? Is it a good way?
I think once you ask a question, the public is going to start thinking about it, thinking about, or once you ask whether it's the actual opinion of the candidate's job. Well, I think once the question's out there, it might affect public opinion a little bit more because it might not be something that they're thinking about. So once you start generating conversation, it might have a little bit more of an effect.
Well, with 2012, Alex mentioned Nate Silver, and one of the things that we talked about was that Silver has a really good model, but it's dependent on the quality of the polls. And there was such a wide range of polls. There was a controversy about whether Gallup, which seemed to be an outlier, was right, or whether the rest of them, which tended to be clustered fairly close, were correct. What lessons can we learn about how you poll and what the construction of a given poll should be in light of the controversy of 2012?
I think looking at polls from history is obviously a good start. I mean, that's how you're going to learn what worked and what didn't work. If you look at, these were the kind of mistakes that were made in this type of poll. Were we calling enough people? Were we putting this out on the website that's viewed by enough variety of people? I think using historical information from other polls is a good place to start.
All right. And that's about out of time. Thank you, Carolyn.